I know that there are a lot more people, especially in the geology and oil and gas sector, that are like, okay, what do I do with my life now that oil and gas is like basically non-existent?
About Alice. She's a geologist turned data science, of course. She received her master's in geology and began her career at Chesapeake Energy in Oklahoma. She really enjoyed her career, but kind of started eyeing data when she started playing around with SQL, and thought that maybe there was a little bit more for her in this data science realm. So then she made her way back to Denver. I think that, yeah, she's in Oklahoma. I believe her heart was tied to Denver because of her husband. I'll have her go through that a little bit. But she came back here and went through Galvanize's data science program. And now she works as a data scientist at Pluto Shift. And so she brings this like very unique perspective that maybe, again, can help you guys in your path into data science.
Ultimately, my husband owns a company in Arvada, Colorado, and he did not move with me to Oklahoma. So we did long distance for about 2.5 years, a lot of flying back and forth. And I got to the point where we were thinking about, okay, like how are we going to continue doing this going forward? And I started looking for geology positions in Denver, Colorado. But I'm sure a lot of you know, just like finding a geology position isn't as easy as going on to Indeed.com and looking up geologist. It's a lot of like who you know and who's in your network. And the Denver market is especially tight. So I really wasn't having very much luck finding a position as a geologist. And I started to think about other options. And this is like May of 19. I had a project that came across my desk that's sort of a project that fell into a lot of geologists' hands at my company. Looking at mud loss is always like a big, like when during drilling operations is always like a big pain in the neck. So like multiple, this project had been done multiple times. And so I had the opportunity to take on this project and take a look at it in a different way. And I started working with our drilling analysts, and they were using SQL. Predominantly, they used Python a little bit, but I think for the most part, they were using SQL, big database, working big data. And so we were taking a look at mud losses, what it looked like in the drilling data. And I got so fascinated by like what they were able to do, and they were able to just the way they were able to pull this data, and where we were able to aggregate it differently and take it changed the project to a way that I didn't think this project could be changed initially. Because usually what I would have thought to do is like, okay, we're going to make a series of maps. We're going to look at these different formations, try and take like a true geologist approach to it. But working with the data analysts showed me that like there's other information, there's other data that could be put into this that could be really applicable for geology. And so that got me kind of looking at SQL a little bit, and then Python. And so I was talking to a friend about, well, maybe I just need to go back and get another master's. Like maybe I go back and I go back to school for data science. And she recommended that I find a boot camp. She had an additional friend who had done a boot camp and really enjoyed it and didn't have to spend another 2 years in school and all that money and time that school takes. And so I started looking for boot camps in the Denver area. And that's when I discovered Galvnaize. And ultimately I left Chesapeake in August of 19, and I started the Galvanize Data Science Bootcamp in December of 19. I knew, like, for me personally, I learn better in person. I really like the group camaraderie.
Mhm.
So I knew I wanted to find an in-person program, and there were a couple options in Denver, but when I guess my approach was to go through and look on LinkedIn at companies that I'd like to work for and see where their data scientists went to school. And quite a few in the oil and gas industry at the time had gone through Galvanize. And I was like, well, that means that there's a network there, and that's where I want to go. To me, it was like grad school condensed into 3 months, or
Mhm.
maybe like an oil and gas internship. Like I spent, the hours are, I think the hours were technically 8 to 5 or something like that. But we were there like 7 to 7. And it was really a full-time job, Monday through Friday, lots of Saturdays. Um, what I enjoyed the most about it was getting to work with the people that were in my cohort. I made a lot of really lasting connections that I'm really grateful for. And then in addition, like a lot of really like-minded people. So we all really helped each other out. But it was, I mean, it's immersive for a reason. Like I felt underwater for quite a bit of it. And you're so focused for those 3 months that they go by super quick, and you sort of look up and like, Jesus, it's already the last week and the final presentation, and where did it all go? And so yeah, it was good. It was tough for me. I feel like personally, and this is something that I also suggest when I've talked to other people about starting up a boot camp, I wish I had taken more time to improve my Python skills before I had started the program. And I think if I had, the program may not have been as stressful, because I was sort of simultaneously learning how to program and also the bigger picture data science aspects at the same time. So it was a little difficult to do both, but it wasn't impossible.
I do feel like we see a lot of people make this transition from geology, oil and gas, into data science and data in general. In your opinion, why do you think so many people make this career transition?
I think the major reason is because you're like, as a geologist, you're already fairly technical, you're experienced. Like, I mean, the scientific method is basically beaten into your head throughout undergrad and grad school. And then it's just sort of like this transition. You're going from like one data heavy industry into a different data heavy industry. And even though you're using different programs and different tools, like you're not mapping, you're coding, it's still using that same scientific method, same kind of technical mindset of that like I was already used to before. Like I was already used to digging through data, running analysis through different formations or operations, and then putting together a presentation on what I found and what was working or what I would suggest. So like, it's really, it felt, in that sense, it feels a little plug and play. Like you're just doing it slightly differently. And I do think that having a scientific background has helped, because in a lot of ways, because I'm a lot more critical of the data that's going into whatever model I'm building. And it's not just, like we have data and we can get this model to work with it, so we get this output. Like I feel like I'm a lot more critical of like, okay, but what does it really mean? Mm-hmm. I had fortune or misfortune. All of my capstone projects in Galvanize were all working with really ugly data sets. So I have a lot of experience with garbage in, garbage out. Not on purpose, it just sort of fell that way. So I got really good at data wrangling and like understanding of like, okay, well, if I put it in the way it is now, we're not getting anything useful out of this model. And I think having a scientific background and just being like overly critical about what you're looking at has been really helpful. You run into all sorts of different, I mean, there are all sorts of different people with different backgrounds in oil and gas. I worked with a lot of engineers at my company, and I don't know if it was just specific to Chesapeake, but I definitely noticed how engineers in different, like, drilling or production or anyway, all sorts of different personality types, and they sort of self-select into these different types of groups. Like the general push or stress of working on a geologic project that needs to get finished, or I was a rig chaser for a little while. I think a lot of people are when they start in oil and gas. So like the having to be detail oriented and focused. I think that really helped. I didn't feel like it was a big stress change going from oil and gas to data science. It in a way that was like felt unfamiliar. Really, I think the thing that I grappled with the most was just learning Python, learning the language. And that really is just time. I don't really think that was like I don't really think Python is like a skill deficit. Like, it's just time. How much time have you had to work with it? And I started programming maybe 6 months before I did the Galvanize program. So like I mentioned earlier, like hindsight wish I would have taken more time, because what I initially started doing was I would work all day at Chesapeake, and I'd come home and I'd teach myself some programming in the evenings. So I wish I had taken more time to learn Python. But really, concept wise, even though like the Galvanize program and data science is statistics heavy, I didn't feel like I was out of grasp from being able to really take in any information.
Yeah,
it's just a lot. It's just
a lot. I know.
But the information itself isn't like, because I had time afterwards to kind of go back and like look at things over again, and taking a little more time to look at it, it all clicks. Certainly like analytical thinking, being able to take a large problem or project or whatever and pick it apart into something manageable, and then like turn it into something that you can then present and then feel good about presenting. Project management is also, I mean, you have to manage your time just as much if you're digging into a formation, you're working on ops, as you do when you're working a data set. So, and then technical, like being able to speak technically, but, and then like just kind of gauge your audience on how high level you need to be. So I feel like those are all skills that transfer really easily, without really having to do like too much stretching. Really the hardest part for me was learning Python.
Yeah.
Because like the concepts for data science, while statistics heavy, like I was able to draw on all sorts of science, like all sorts of classes that I took in my scientific background.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and not just the math classes. I mean, a lot of like the way that we're taught to think, I think in geology relates to how you're taught to think as a data scientist. I certainly feel like I had a lot of practice as a geologist, and I have a lot of practice as a data scientist, like taking something very technical that I've been in the weeds for weeks in, and being able to pull it out high level to talk to somebody in maybe the C-suite or a VP of a company and just be okay, like they don't want to know about like the nitty-gritty data wrangling that I had to do. They want to know what the end result is. And I think that I had a lot of good practice as a geologist doing that.
Yeah, that's a huge skill. Being able to translate data into like business, like a business success. Like, how is this going to be important for business?
Python. As much Python as you can beforehand, so that you're not trying to figure out like the difference between pandas and NumPy when you're like sitting in class also trying to learn all of the statistics. And that's like an exaggeration, but like yeah, I think Python especially, because so when I was working as a geologist, you have to learn like these different mapping programs. Like every company uses a different one. I was working in geographics predominantly at Chesapeake, and just the same way that like it took me a few weeks to get acclimated to that different kind of mapping software. Like I think you got to give yourself the time to get acclimated, like because Python is the base of what you need to build everything else on. Certainly it would have helped to have a little bit more statistics. So like if I had maybe spent a little time watching some YouTube videos on like different kind of statistic methods, brushing up on the one class I took in undergrad. So that would have been helpful, but really I felt like Galvnaize did a good job of teaching the statistical portions of data science that I use more on a day-to-day. And what I feel like is more important going in is making sure that you feel comfortable coding in Python, and SQL is a plus. I use some free online like Python learning courses. I watched some YouTube videos. I did find the Galvanize material helpful, so I worked my way through some of that. I actually did the pre-boot camp. I don't remember what it's called anymore, but there was like a the prep class. So I took the prep class, and that was helpful. And really ultimately what it ended up, so like teaching myself at night was only getting me so far. So that's why I left Chesapeake in August instead of in November. So I left 3 months ahead so that I could spend a lot more time getting familiar with it. Code Wars was helpful. But I found somebody else who was also trying to get into the program through the prep class, and we just ended up working together, working our way through the material together. And so really for me, it was finding like a fellow sufferer to like learn in tandem. And they had a little bit more coding experience than I did, so I could learn from them. And that was extremely helpful. Really deciding what it is about data science that you find interesting. For example, like I wasn't super interested in language processing or working so much with words. What really brought me into data science was operations optimization. So I really liked the idea of being able to like we can improve this process so much if we just look at the data a little closer. And so I really liked that aspect, but that's in addition something I kind of liked about geology more than I liked. Like I found a lot more passion within operations, just because it's a fascinating process, than I did necessarily with like play development. So I felt like maybe I was already sort of geared to going into data in the first place. So like really thinking about like, okay, like where does my passion lie within data science? And I think sometimes that's a hard shift because, like for example, right now I'm working with a company that does operations optimization, which is awesome. But I do kind of miss geology. So I don't get to talk about rocks as often. And mostly it's just to annoy my coworkers. So, but I do think that there are a lot of places for geologists to improve geology using data science. So I think to get started, really just to like think about what you'd like to do with it. I do think that like going through some of the course material and like if you get a few months in, because I do think it takes a couple of months to really feel somewhat comfortable with programming or like with Python or whatever language you're learning. But if it gets to the point where like every day it's a drag to have to sit at your computer and like hit one roadblock after another with your code because that doesn't go away, like then maybe this isn't something that like down the road you're gonna feel like you made a good investment, time and money. But I think that like I think one of the things that geologists are particularly attuned to is like coming up against one roadblock after another, because especially when you're looking subsurface, like there's always a hidden problem around each corner. So like that problem solving skill, I guess another overlap. And like the willingness to like stubborn it out and just like see it through. If that's something that kind of gets your gears rolling, then I think data science is a good fit. Anywhere in data science is a good fit.
Yeah, I think that like that grittiness and like mental resiliency is one of the biggest things you need to be like any programmer.
Yeah, and it's certainly like that. It's a nice little dopamine rush when like code runs after like you've hit one error after another, or even if you get like a different error than the one you've been getting like before, it's great. So, there's little wins in there, even if what you're looking at in the data doesn't necessarily go your way.